Welcome into another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, Drew Landry, and just so we all know, this is the top politics podcast west of I-35. And so I actually have a special guest with me. It is KMAX here in Lubbock, KMAX very own Jen Phillips. And so, Jen, thank you so much for joining the Outsider Podcast, and so good to have you.
Well, I'm honored, Drew. I feel like this is kind of backwards for us. Normally, I'm asking questions.
Yeah, this is a little weird, but it's always fun to be on Talking Points. We have such a good time, and I really think the viewers also see that, right?
Oh, definitely. We actually just usually can't stop talking. So at least they see two chatty Cathys.
Always wanting to spill the tea, and always wanting to know what's going on. And so, that's what we try to do with our chats on the air and give some back
Definitely.
behind the scenes stuff. So, let's talk a little bit about how you came to Lubbock, how you became a journalist. Uh, why? What made you want to become a journalist? What made you want to get into, music, which we'll talk about a little later. So,
Yeah. Well, those are kind of hand in hand for me. So I began my college career as a vocal performance major. When I kind of started, I just knew that I loved music and performing so much. I grew up a dancer and a singer. Those are things that I mean, they're still just anytime I have an opportunity to do either one, I just take it in stride. But when I got to University of Oklahoma, which if you're listening from Lubbock, just like don't hate me for that. Sorry. Third generation Sooner. I didn't really have an option. I was going there. But I got to OU and declared that major and kind of started realizing my future would either be um, in some sort of opera performance or classical performance, or I would be a choir teacher, which both of those are wonderful, beautiful professions. They just didn't really speak to me as much as I wanted them to. So I kind of went through a period of what the heck am I going to do? So I took an intro to journalism class my second semester at OU, and it was one of those weed out classes where there were 300 people, and some of them were just there just because they felt like it was going to be an easy class. It was intro to mass comm, and the professor had a whistle that would blow at us, and I had always been interested in journalism. And I was so disappointed. I felt like I was like in a I don't know, a barn as a bunch of cows. Like I was really just not impressed. And so I let that kind of sour my taste on journalism for a moment. But I knew that I wanted to do something that mattered. And that I could change things that I felt like were maybe not right in the world. And that's just something that was always instilled in me was you need to do something that has a purpose, which is a double-edged sword because sometimes I do it for a lot less money than I need to. But that is journalists everywhere. But I think what unites a lot of people that are in politics and journalism both is that we find great purpose in what we do. And so that was something that led me to a poli sci major, and I was pre law at OU, and then something crazy happened. My One of my friends that I grew up with, and I recruited her to OU, and I recruited her to my sorority. She was sick one day, and she was in school to be a video producer at the Gaylord College at OU. And she said, "You've got to fill in for me. I cannot miss again. I'm going to get a terrible grade. I have an evening newscast tonight. The student newscast at OU is actually a really big deal. They do one every night. Their equipment is insane. Their teachers are so incredible. Their program there cranks out journalists that are just, I mean, from the get go, I mean, icons. So I was super intimidated, and she begged me. And I said, "I'm the best friend ever. You owe me some Chardonnay." And I went, and I I mean, my jaw dropped. I wanted to stay forever. I was like, I'm gonna live in this place. Change of address. I live at the Gaylord now. So obsessed. And so what I realized is I let kind of a bad experience in the beginning with a class that really didn't reflect what that program was about at all. Sour me on something that I had to do, and I was hungry for it. So I ended up finishing my degree at University of North Texas, and was so lucky that when I was there, I had some pretty incredible teachers that became mentors really quickly. And some pretty incredible classmates. A lot of times, journalism majors will graduate and then, go into something that's, journalism esque, but not
Yeah.
exactly, broadcast journalists or newspaper journalists, things like that. I had a lot of people in my class specifically that are still in the industry, which I love. And I think that speaks to the instruction that we received and the inspiration we got there. But yeah, so my love for journalism grew immediately. I graduated in 2017 and went to the Paris, Texas Bureau of the Sherman Market, which, if you're like, where is that? Yeah, me too. I worked, when I tell you I worked out of a closet. Like I anchored a 2.5 minute newscast every 6 and 10 o'clock newscast Monday through Friday. It's simulcast over the C block of the newscast, and it was just Paris and everything north. So like Lamar County, and then the Red River's right there. So then you go into Choctaw County, McCurtain County, which is always, that's where Broken Bow is. You always see those like commercials that are like,
Right.
visit Broken Bow. Actually, it's kind of scary there. Ho Chi
Oh,
Town is great, but if you want the tea, like it's the Wild West out there. But it was really crazy cool to be a journalist out there. So
wow. That's an incredible story. That,
yeah,
that's amazing. So where you go from Paris in that area and
yeah.
and then where do you come to Lubbock next, or are you still in the North Texas area, or
So I worked for a year out of that bureau, which was wild. I mean, like to the point where I would call, every morning, I did my calls and I'd be like, hey, good morning, police chief. How's it going? Anything I should know? Also, what are you doing for lunch? Because I'm lonely. So just a year of that, which I think was so good because it really made me like honestly so gritty. Like there were times where like I would just have to solve a lot of problems myself. Like if something broke or if something, crazy happened and I had to randomly, like I literally chased a man who had escaped from jail with another reporter in our car, like across McCurtain County, and he was living off the land like Billy the Kid. I mean, it's the literal
oh,
Wild West. So
smokes.
I think it was such a good experience. Like truly cannot be replaced. But after a year of that, I called my boss and I was like, hi, any openings in Sherman? Because this is a lot. So I moved to Sherman as the weekend anchor there. And then within a year, we had a morning anchor quit. And I signed a contract to be the morning anchor. So excited, thrilled. One of my best friends in the world was going to be my co-anchor. I was just, it was life was good, living easy. And then the day that I signed my morning anchor contract, I walked out, sat down at my desk. Our evening anchor turned to me and said, and she was our executive producer as well, turned to me and said, did you sign a contract? And I said, yes, I did. And she said, how long? And I said, 3 years. And she stood up, walked into the news director's office and quit. And handed in, she handed in 30 days because she's graceful and helpful. But I went through a 30-day process of basically my station interviewing everyone they could think of just in case to see, because I was 26 at the time. And they were like, there's no way we can have a 26-year-old be the evening anchor. But I got it. I got the job. And
Wow.
it was really cool experience. I anchored next to someone that I watched in college. He was at KOCO in Oklahoma City. I would literally not schedule class at at the midday hours so that I could go home and watch Dan Thomas because I thought he was so good at what he did. He was so entertaining, such a good storyteller, just really good at breaking complicated issues down for viewers, which is, most of my job.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got to by the time I was in Sherman, he was there actually as the managing editor and the evening anchor. So I got to anchor next to him for nearly 3 years, which was such a dream. And he's still just such an icon to me. And then we had the pandemic happen and some crazy things happened. And I'm not going to say the word ousted for Dan, but he was no longer with the company at the end of all of that. So I stayed on, signed another contract, but in the process of all of that, I met a guy from Denison, Texas, who I ended up dating and getting engaged to, and about 2 months, yeah, 2.5, 3 months before we were about to get married, which is June of 2022. He came home and said, "Honey, we're moving to Lubbock." And I said, "You're kidding me." That's a funny joke. And he said, "No, actually, not at all." So he's in the freight business, and I've been waiting for a long time to be promoted, which in his industry, as is mine, that usually means that you move. And his time came, and I am here in Lubbock because
Yeah.
I'm the best wife ever.
Yeah.
So,
That's an amazing story. I want to just kind of circle back to something that you mentioned earlier was that when you signed your first contract, somebody like one of the people asked you if you signed it and then
yeah.
they quit. Like what was like did this person not like you? Did this person feel threatened by you? I mean, that seems
Well,
rather irrational for someone to do that.
so her name's Maureen Kane, and first of all, she still scares the pants off me. She knows that. She's like a legend in like Sherman, Texoma area broadcast. She just had been there forever. She's so good at what she does.
Mhm.
She was kind of waiting for an out in the industry. She's a realtor now, like an incredibly successful one, like one of
Mhm.
those people that whatever she does, she's just going to be the absolute best at. So she had kind of been waiting to make that career transition, and she did not want to leave that station in the lurch. With because there's a lot of turnover in small markets, and it's hard to get someone to really agree to stay on for a long time because a lot of people, and myself included, I started my first job at that station thinking I'm going to treat this like a master's degree. I'm going to move on, as soon as I can. I wanted to work in either Austin covering Texas politics or DC covering Washington politics.
Right.
So I was really not expecting to stay. I fell in love with the area, and it helps when you fall in love with someone who actually is from there. But it's a place that I really truly loved, and so she was kind of just testing me to see how long I would stay. And then when she figured out that I was staying, is when she felt comfortable. She said, putting in her time. I thought she was crazy. I thought I'd never get that job. I'm pretty sure my boss at the time also thought she was crazy, but because she's such a legend and had endorsed me so kindly, I think that played a large role in me getting that job. And I'm forever grateful. But if there's someone intimidated in that relationship, it is me. She scares the pants off me still. Um, but anytime I like need something like, "Hey, can you look this over?" or "What do you think about this?" I mean, she's brutally honest, but she is literally always right. So
Wow.
it's nice to have those people in your life.
Exactly right. You're exactly right. So when you come here to Lubbock, were you were you guaranteed anything other than a desk spot with KMAC or KLBK? Like, did you choose which one you wanted to really be with, or how'd that work out?
So strangely enough, I first of all, you never really get to choose your location as a journalist. Like you go where the work is.
Okay.
So I knew I was kind of in an uphill battle there. someone from my station, Stan Smith, had recently gotten a job as sports director at KMAC. So he was the first call that I made
Yeah.
because I was really, I mean, really just kind of panicking. So I had actually signed a brand new contract to stay on at my last station for 3 years. Um, and I had made managing editor, was really proud. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have someone negotiate on my behalf. I was really proud of myself. Like, yeah, you did it, girl.
That's
Got
awesome.
a raise that I loved and was proud of, and was the executive producer of the OTT desk, which is a streaming service that Gray provides that I just think is amazing. Really, really believed in that stuff. That's where hopefully my industry is headed, as long as we don't, shutter before then. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of, beautiful things that come out of the online stuff. It's, the sky's the limit. So I was really proud of that. Made managing editor at 27 years old. I was really proud of that.
That's
And then
amazing.
I had to go into my boss on the first day of that contract and say, "Hi, my fiance just got a job in Lubbock, Texas. I will be leaving." Granted, I was in the first 90 days of that contract, so didn't technically breach it, but gave him that news through tears because I did not want to leave. That was home for me. And then walked out of that meeting and called Stan Smith and said, "How do you like your station? Because I need a job, and oh my God, what do I do?" And so he said, "Apply," and he would, give me a recommendation to his boss. Um, and he, a lot of people start their career in small markets. So when someone with several years of experience did apply to Lubbock, Stan said, my future boss and his current boss came running down the hallway and said, "You know this girl because she put your name down, and I need to know if this is true." And he's like, "Yeah, she actually has to move here." So um, got got a lot of interest from him right away, which I was really flattered and actually very grateful. And then because I actually had just signed a contract with a different ownership company, I did go through several conversations with the guys on the other side of town.
Yeah.
And they just really didn't have any vacancies that fit my skill set or my goals. And so, they were very kind and really did try to accommodate me, but just didn't have anything that was what was going to open the correct doors for me. And so they kindly agreed to let me out of that contract anyway, because I could have transferred, but it was just it just wasn't right, and he could tell it wasn't right, and the whole thing. So I
Yeah.
ended up at KMAC. They were just really kind, actually a bit aggressive on the recruitment process, which always feels good to be loved. So I knew I was in the right spot when I got here. And yeah, my boss said the magic words, "We have a local politics show." And I said, "Really?" And and he said, "Most people say ooh when I say that." And I said, "Oh, no, no, that's, I love that stuff."
Yeah.
So got really excited about that, and landed. I know I landed in the right spot for me and my family. My boss, I always say, is like Santa Claus. Like, he's got sparkly eyes and a sweet soul, and that doesn't happen very often
Yeah.
in news. So I really appreciate that this is where I ended up.
That's awesome. And just, I'll say it because you probably can't. In Lubbock, there's four news stations, and two of them are owned by two different places. You have KLBK and KMAC, they're owned by Nexstar. And then you
Mhm.
have KCBD and Fox 34 that's owned by Gray. And what Jen was talking about the place across town was KCBD, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the news, the news guy, what's the name that they give?
News director.
The news director. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know him. He's a really nice guy. He means well, and I'm sure he probably,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I can totally imagine him trying to, and all those people trying to accommodate what you were wanting. But it's good that you ended up on the station that has an actual local politics show, because those
Yes.
other three don't. And so,
Which is so wild and not what I was anticipating at all.
yeah.
I've never actually hosted a show that is all about politics.
Mhm.
So that was something that was new to me, but I was drooling at the thought of it. So excited. And again, yeah, the KCBD news director was so kind to me. And like when I see him, around, I give him a wave and, hey, how's it going? And hope you're doing great and stuff. So really like no feelings, no hard feelings there either way. But I do know that I landed exactly where I was supposed to be and more than I even knew back then. So
That's
really, really
awesome.
good.
That's a great feeling, and they're lucky to have you, and this area is lucky to have you too. But
Well, thank you.
the guy who would host the a local politics show named Brian Mudd,
Yes.
he goes back to school, and now there's an opening here for you to take it. Like were you just like did you ask for it? Did someone come to you to want to do that? How'd that work out for you to land that hosting of Talking Points?
A little bit. So a little bit of all of the above, actually.
Okay, great.
So when I got to KMAC, Ryan Chandler, who was a reporter, had just taken over Talking Points. And his tenure there was super short. And it was just like you said, because Mr. Mudd, as we call him, had just made the decision to go back to Texas Tech and get his master's degree because he's going to be a professor there. And I mean, I just cannot even imagine how lucky those students are because you want to talk about a legend. That's Brian Mudd. He's so
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
Um, so amazing thing for him. Ryan Chandler is also really just an incredible journalist. Several years younger than me, so it was kind of like funny because he is so passionate and knowledgeable about politics. And he was always asking me questions about, how, like journalistically, how should I do this and what should I? And
Hmm.
I'm like, you are more than capable, sir. I mean, just don't even ask me questions. Do what you do. And he went from here to the Next Star Austin bureau, and actually just got a new job that I'm not allowed to say where it is yet, but I can just tell you that you will see him everywhere.
Yeah.
He's amazing. So yeah, that's a God-given gift. So a little bit intimidating when he announced that he was leaving to go to the Austin bureau, and my boss said, "Okay, yeah, you're up." And I had filled in once on talking points, and I had just a very different idea for the way the show should be formatted
Hmm.
than what Ryan did. So it was a little bit of a risk. I just kind of, my boss is really cool about saying, take it, do what you want to do with it. And I'm really appreciative of that. But I produce the show, anchor the show, host the show, book the show. Like it's all me. And so that is, wow, really freeing, a little scary if I do it wrong. So I was really pumped and also terrified.
So it was really neat because I appeared on there a few times, well, more than a few, but before you took over the reins, and
Yeah.
so and then you get a hold of me, and I'm thinking, I wonder how she knows who I am.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm totally glad that we made that connection so that we can have that really fun partnership that we have on screen, and that's all real, folks. Like all what you
Oh,
see
yeah.
on there is not made up. We're not playing nice. We actually enjoy talking with each other about politics.
Yeah, well, it's really rare too to find someone who pays as much attention, I feel like, as I do to it,
Yeah.
and then actually finds like real joy in finding like, the little secret languages that our lawmakers have about this. And like, there's so many nuanced things that it's like watching a soap opera. Like, it's so fun, so interesting. And the fact that we get to talk to these people. I mean, these lawmakers that are making decisions about our lives, but I literally get to see them face to face, and so do you. And I just think it's really cool. So when someone else is in that boat, it's like, I mean, no one else is going to understand that. So it's nice to have a friend that actually gets that too.
It is it's really cool. So I want to ask you a little bit about some of the job that you have done because you've done some really good reporting,
Thank
and
you.
you've done some really interesting interviews, and so I want your analysis. You get to sit with the analysis
Ooh,
hat.
okay.
Okay, let's talk about some of the ones like whenever you covered Wade Cowan, his Wade Cowan, just for those who don't know, he challenged now Speaker Dustin Burrows in the 2024, no, 2020, was it 24?
Yeah, I guess 24
Republican
primaries.
primary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like forever, but it
Hmm.
wasn't that long ago.
Honestly, yeah, that was about a year ago, which is
Yeah.
wild to think about.
So like when you interviewed him, when you watched some of his events,
Hmm.
um, could you tell that he really wanted it, and could you see that it wasn't going to happen?
Well, I think what I try to tell myself when I'm in an election process is I try not to necessarily predict the outcome,
Mhm.
because I think it can hinder the way that I treat people.
Okay.
So the way that I approach my election coverage is I go back and I watch as like I'm like I always say journalists are professional stalkers, which is, I mean, that's so accurate. That's why a lot of us become PIs after this, like we have those skills. But I become like an actual sponge. Like I will go as far back as I have time, watch everything, read everything these people have. And I make sure, if I'm covering a primary, like in this case, it was, Speaker Burrows and Mr. Cowan, and I soaked up everything I could about both of these men before I talked to either of them. Interesting enough, Speaker Burrows did not interview with us during the primary or afterward. Like we really didn't talk to him for about a year, which is definitely a media strategy. It was one that kind of made me sad because I like to talk to our local people. I like to have a relationship with them,
Mhm.
just personally, because if they need something or if something happens, I like to be able to say, hey, it's me. Like,
Yeah.
we're not starting off in a different foot. But that was his choice, and clearly it paid off. And so, I respect there. But when I was talking to Mr. Cowan, I could just tell he represented a group of people that maybe hadn't had a voice in a while. And so they were super motivated because finally these people that supported this man felt like they had someone who represented they themselves, and they weren't saying, oh, well, I like this person, but maybe they don't agree with me on XYZ. There were a lot of people that really, really loved him and felt like they had someone who finally represented them. And I picked up on that energy immediately, just in his campaign. And the people who ran his campaign were so devoted to him. And I think that does speak a lot to, the character of the person. I've been covering local politics now for nearly 8 years. Whew, that's kind of weird to think about, but
Yeah.
you can tell some campaigns are just, yeah, I'm gonna win, no big deal. And some people are, oh my God, there's no way I'm gonna win. I'm freaking out. And then there's some people who are just genuinely there because they want to make the world a better place. I felt that energy with Mr. Cowan, and there's a lot of people in West Texas who actually are like that and are lawmakers. They really are there to make the world a better place. They think they have good ideas. They believe in what they have to offer. And I really like that about West Texas because that is not the way it is everywhere.
Yeah. That's a really good point because what was the vibe about politicians and interviewing them when you were in North Texas?
In North Texas, it's so interesting because I'm in Northeast Texas technically, but I'm so adjacent to the Metroplex, which is so different. I always like describe politicians from the Metroplex like the Capitol in the Hunger Games. Like everything is so much more pomp and circumstance. Like you can't send a press release and just expect people to show up. Like if you send me a press release in Lubbock, I'm the politics reporter. I'm gonna show up, or I'm gonna make sure I have video of that. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
It's important to me. There's so much going on in North Texas that it's like, oh, well, this person's doing this and this person's doing this and this is over here. And it was just wild. Like the when I was in Texoma, Reggie Smith was the local state representative there.
Okay.
He pinned the heartbeat bill.
Hmm.
That's huge, and still being talked about right now because it's still happening. Uh, you would think that making legislation like that would keep you in office for a very long time, but this is how tumultuous it is in that part of the state. Do you remember back during the pandemic when the salon owner from Dallas cut Ted Cruz's hair because he showed up at her salon?
Yes.
And it was a whole big thing of, local business is being shut down. This is
Yeah.
not good for local business. Everyone's suffering. This is terrible. And Ted Cruz went to this woman's salon, got his hair cut, and she actually ended up being arrested for keeping her salon open.
Yeah.
It was a big thing. Her name's Shelley Luther. She's
Shelley
actually
Luther.
from Pilot Point, which is in Texoma.
Hmm.
She ran for a couple of different positions,
Yeah.
and Shelley Luther actually unseated Reggie Smith in this past election, which blew my mind only because Reggie Smith was so strong, not because Shelley Luther did not have the backing, because she did. She had a story, she had a mission. She is extremely well spoken on the things that she believes in, and she's so good at marketing herself and really grew herself a base. And watching her do that was kind of incredible. I'm like, wow, I mean, this lady knows what she's doing. But at the same time, it was shocking to see her unseat someone who had so much clout in the House. But things like that happen because there's so many incredibly intelligent, incredibly involved, and incredibly strategic people in that market that just paying attention to the people that are in the seat right now is not enough. So kind of here I get to have a little bit more of a personal relationship with our people, and there's a little bit less turnover, I guess, is the biggest
Mhm.
difference.
Do you, when you ask a question to a lawmaker, to a city councilman, to a mayor, county leader, whatever, and
Mhm.
they just stick to their own talking points, no pun intended,
Yeah.
and they don't answer your question directly, does that frustrate you? Does that just make you want to disengage, or do you just want to, find the local clip or the closest clipboard and beat them over the head? What's your initial response to something like that?
Well, I hope that when that happens, that people pay attention
Hmm.
is what I get out of it. Because for me, a lot of times when I'm asking a question, it's because, I mean, I'll tell you this, like a 30-minute talking points episode, it's actually 21 and a half minutes with commercials.
Right.
That is usually two interviews, and also I'll do either a deep dive into a piece of legislation that we're talking about so that people are up to speed, or I'll say, here's what happened in politics this week, blah,
Hmm.
blah, blah, here's some headlines, whatever the week kind of calls for. I will tell you that a lot of times there's an 8-minute interview that airs. It comes from a 21-minute conversation with a lawmaker,
Yeah.
and I usually will take the part of the conversation that I feel like I get the most meat. I really appreciate when lawmakers can be candid with me. And again, that's another reason I like to have personal relationships with them. I'm not a gotcha journalist. And I think that when people get to know me, they see that. Like I'm earnestly and genuinely asking these questions of them because they're in the room. So I want to know and I'm curious, and I'm a giant nerd. So I also just want to know. But when people, stick to these scripts, and and I know if you're sticking to a script because again, I have stalked you fully. So I've seen every journalist that you've talked to that you've stuck to the same script and said the same thing over and over. I'll sometimes ask it in a different way, which sometimes will annoy said politician a little bit, but sometimes I let it lie because I hope that people are paying attention, and I trust the viewers of talking points to be a little bit more attuned to what's happening in the world, and what's happening in our community. Because if you're watching talking points, you either had the news on in the morning and you left it on by accident when you went to church, and then you came home and you said, oh, it's a local show, or you meant to do it and then all of a sudden you are a little more, I hope, a little more educated on what's happening. So if you are an avid watcher of talking points, I hope that you pick up on those things. I don't think it's necessarily my job to point out like, you said that last week. I mean, can you say something different? I don't want to do that necessarily. because I'm going to let them be who they are,
Yeah.
um, and kind of let the world see that and make their own judgments. Maybe the thing that they say over and over and over as part of their script is the thing that you love most about them. And it's, as a journalist, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just here to show you the pretty and the ugly, and you make the decision. So that's kind of, sometimes I'm like, oh man, but I don't press too hard because that's who you are. I'm not going to change that. So
Yeah, that was leading me to my next question. I was curious what kind of feedback you get from some of the viewers who who aren't in the Looney Tune bin, uh,
yeah,
about does anyone ever like respond to you and say, hey, I appreciate the interview, but I really wish you would have asked him X or pressed him harder on issue A, or have you ever received that? Has any feedback given to you about what interview that you received or anything like that?
I guess I haven't really gotten feedback on specific interviews. I've had a couple viewers like come at my inbox swinging because they think I'm like hiding something, or um like maybe not covering something for a reason,
Oh.
and I'm in on it. And okay, well, no, like I had one lady who was really on my back about curriculum, and this was before the state board of education voted yes on the bluebonnet curriculum.
Okay.
And this was, after the election, but really soon after the election. We actually had a delegation of people from Lubbock go there, go to Austin in favor of the bluebonnet curriculum. But this is a super, controversial curriculum,
Hmm.
because it does allow a little bit more faith-based and specifically Christian-based um, materials in the classroom.
Yeah.
And there was one lady who's really on me about that, and then she kind of took the opportunity to also grill me about what I knew about third party vendors in education, and why they were given such a large role, and why, and really went into it and kind of assumed that she was schooling me
Mm.
on all this stuff. And I knew a lot about it, only because of a personal experience that I had growing up with. I'm going to age myself. The tax test.
Oh yeah.
I think it's a star now. They change it every
Yeah.
every 3 years, and you're like, wow, I'm old. I remember the toss test, but I never took that one. But so I had a personal experience with that growing up. Where a friend, like her mom started really digging into where this goes, and what is this standardized test, and where is it coming from. So I do know more than the average Joe about that. But she was really, really on me, sent me this like 3 page long email, and
Oh my.
really, really mad about it. And I did read every word, because I do read every word, by the
Mm.
way. Like, even when you email me and tell me that my lipstick makes me look disgusting, I do read that. Thank you. But,
Oh,
but,
ouch.
yeah, loony bin, that's the key word there. But,
Yeah.
I emailed her back and I said, I'm really grateful that you're paying such close attention to this. I guess I didn't really realize that this was relevant to this session, because we haven't voted on, vendor contracts in some time. And I know that there was some legislation passed last session that did affect that, but it didn't drastically affect that. But I know that that ties into what's coming with the school choice and all of that movement. So I am paying attention to it. I just want you to know. But since it's news, if it's not current, I'm not going to do anything about it right now. But I'm paying attention, and I'm glad that you are too. And thanks. And I think she was kind of like, oh, okay. And just like really put her guns down quickly. But man, she came out swinging at first, and I was a little, whew, okay, all right. You scared me, but okay, we got it.
Okay. Yeah, that's, that blows my mind. But I guess, I think of it like this. I mean, I have columns that are published in the Avalanche Journal, and
Mhm.
I have sometimes some people will send me an email, and sometimes they'll tell me terrible, mean things. Sometimes they'll say some, ask me some questions. And so, it, when you put yourself out there like that, I guess you're opening yourself up. I guess, but I guess what I
Yeah.
really take away from it is they read it and they know how to
Yes.
contact me. And so I guess the positive to take from that, because I always try to look on the good side, positive side,
Yep.
is that they watched.
Yeah, exactly. Or they're paying attention enough to be knowledgeable enough to know how you have made them angry. And I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
we're not starting from square one. So that's okay. And like let's talk about this. Maybe a little nicer. But to each their own, so whatever.
I want to ask you, this is more of a spilling tea question here. Who
Okay.
has been like maybe your worst interview? Like somebody who you were just either pulling teeth trying to get answers from, or was just rude? Or is it the same
Hmm.
person, or is it two different people? Or, just curious because you've had really good interviews. Obviously, they're all with me, but then you've
Yeah.
also had to have some not so good interviews. And I'm curious as to how that went and what that was like.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think. So I guess a lot of the people in West Texas have just been so incredibly forthcoming, which I really appreciate. I think that's also just part of the culture in West Texas. They're like, "This is me." I'll answer your question, of course. I'm trying to think. Back when I was in Texoma, there were a few candidates that I think I just absolutely terrified, just for, local positions. Um, and they were just really, really not ready to be on TV. And I felt so bad, because I thought, hey, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to get you on TV. We're going to talk to every single one of these candidates. And of course, I want you to be a part of this because you're part of this primary or whatever. That's usually when I get the most like one word answers,
Oh
which
my
is,
gosh.
and you're just like, your heart aches because you're like, oh, this is your time, like use it. um, and you just feel so bad. I don't feel like I've had um, really an interview since I've gotten here that made me feel icky or
Mhm.
made me feel like I was, like just really ineffective. Most of the roadblocks that I come across actually are in FOIAs that I file here, which is really interesting. But and I can complain all day long about like transparency, whatever. But then I watched a documentary last week about um, a, a case in the LA district courts that, I mean, literally the reporter had to go undercover and go steal some files, which by the way is not ethical whatsoever. But
Wow.
and then I felt way better about what happens here. So I don't get a lot of pushback. Some people just don't message me back ever, which I will tell you, like I will find you in the least terrifying way possible. But like I will write a letter to your house. I will show up if I have to. Like I want to be fair. So if I'm talking to one person like in a campaign or with an ideal, right? Like if I'm doing a show on school choice coming up soon, and I am not a journalist if I'm not fair.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a pundit if I'm not
Yeah.
fair. And so I have to find someone on the other side of this issue. I found them. They're actually not hard to find on either side right now because that's a big issue. But there's sometimes I really do have to crawl through the mud to go pull someone out and say, you have to talk to me because this has to be fair. That's really been the challenge for me is my issue based episodes. People are scared to put their name on something, but in terms of politicians here, people are pretty forthcoming. um, Mayor Mark McBrayer cracks me up because he started as a councilman who just really, like, he's a quiet giant man, and so he didn't have a lot to say at first, but he's so much more comfortable now. So I don't think that was ever him, being a stinker as much as just being like, okay, yes, all right. You're like, okay. um so but he's like the kindest soul, so that was never meant maliciously ever. But now he's the mayor, and so he does it a lot, so he's so used to it, and he's like, let me tell you, the whole background on this. And I'm like, thank you, you rock. So stuff like that is way nicer.
Absolutely. Do you What's been a story like that you may have come across you didn't think was a big deal? It turned out maybe you got more responses over that story, or one that you may have gone the other way that you thought, oh man, this is going to really be something, and then it may not have turned out that the way that you wanted. Has that happened to you either way?
For sure, it definitely has. I think the one here that made me kind of sad that it didn't get more traction was I did my first when I filled in for Ryan Chandler the first time on Talking Points,
Mm,
and I did a story. I did an issue-based show, and it was about a family who had reached out to me who they have a son who kind of fell through the cracks of the mental health system. He suffers from schizophrenia, among many other things, and has eras of his life where he's fully functioning and doing great. And then he has eras of his life where he's a dangerous human being, not really by the fault of his own. Um, and because he's an adult who can function sometimes the way that the laws are written, no one in his family could get power of attorney over him. And basically, when I talked with his family, they hadn't heard from him in a long time. They were looking for him, but their concern was when they did find him, well, what the heck are we going to do? We can't
yeah.
have him committed. He's a functioning adult until he's not. But there's this, catch 22 in the laws. And I talked with his family, and they were so concerned about him, um, and really had laid out some specific. Sorry, that would be my child in the background. Um, and they had some very specific asks of lawmakers, um, that may or may not have been realistic, but um, they wanted to talk to lawmakers about this and ask for this legislation to be presented. And I had a long conversation with State Senator Charles Perry, who was very open to the idea and talked a lot about what he had done to advocate for more beds in mental health facilities in our area, which was very needed. Talked about funding that he had passed in the legislative session prior that allowed for more mental health research and more mental health facilities and all of that. Talked about changing protocols at jails when you have someone in crisis who gets taken to a jail. Do they
Yeah.
stay there or do they go? I mean, that's a really big change. And that was something that he was personally working on. Had a great conversation with him, had a great conversation with his family. Felt like I presented it so well, and nobody cared.
No.
And I was like, this is such, like, patting myself on the back. I am changing the world. And truly, I mean, I heard nothing from anyone. I'm not even sure if people at my station watched that episode because they just
Oh
thought to
man.
themselves, she's filling in. It's not a real episode, whatever. And I was pretty heartbroken by that because I felt like that was an issue that just deserved so much attention. And it really didn't get very much. And I still think about that family,
Yeah.
I have talked with him in the last year, like, hey, how is he? Have you found him? Um, and yeah, I mean, I still hope that that happens, but whew, like that was such a bummer. I was so
Yeah.
excited, and I wanted there to be like, hey, there's a bill being written right now with this guy's name on it. Like I was really pumped, and whether or not it even passed, just to have that recognition of this problem exists. There's a conundrum in the laws. Yes, there's personal freedoms, but then how do you cross that line and where is it and all of that? And such a good conversation, and nobody cared. But I tried, and I'm not going to stop trying. It's just kind of a bummer.
Oh, well, that I think that's a wonderful mission, and now that, I think that would be a tremendous service. I mean, that's awesome that you're keeping up that. So, good on you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to come of it because, yeah,
Yeah.
who knows? The track record isn't good, but yeah, I think about them often because, yeah, I mean, that's just heartbreaking. So I hope something happens.
Yeah. Do I have a couple more questions for you, and then we can wrap this up. Is that you made a comment earlier that I was going to ask about, and then you kind of led me there, was about the state of media, the state of local media.
Yes.
What let's understand that it's not what it used to be. Certainly, when I was a child, and I hate to date myself even more. I'm a little older than you. I have a 1908 sort of a birth date, so
Okay.
that's it certainly the newspapers are different. TV local news is different. um
Yes.
what can you speak about how we can keep local media local, if that's even possible, and why do you think it's gone the way that it's gone?
That's such a good question. On my mind 24/7,
Yeah.
actually. I watch as a local journalist, I'm watching people across the country lose their jobs. Um, I became a journalist, like capital J journalist, because I truly believe in the power of the fourth estate. Holding truth to power is the reason I'm here. It's so incredibly important. I might sound a little more invigorated on this topic in particular because I'm reading All the President's Men right now.
Yeah.
But this is just, if you look at history, first of all, you wouldn't know about half of it if it weren't for the local journalists who were there, who knew to be there. And it's not luck, it's knowing your community, knowing the issues, knowing the people in it, and being there for them. Um, I've never felt like local journalism is more important than it is right now. Um, because, I mean, scroll through your social media. There is so much misinformation right now. And it is chaos, like pure chaos. And I love that we have the technology now that allows more people to get involved in things like politics. We have to be so careful with the power of our words and with how information disseminates. Um, Words are powerful, ideas are powerful. We have people who get indoctrinated and do horrific things on misinformation, which is insane to me. So I'm looking at the state of the world, and I'm seeing that local journalism is more important now than it ever has been, in my opinion. Granted, I'm about to be 32, so think about that and take that with a grain of salt. But I think that it's never been more important than it is right at this moment. And then I'm looking at the way that these large media conglomerates look at news. Yes, we are a business, absolutely. And they employ thousands of people, tens of thousands of people across the country. Um, I hope that when they look at making cuts, because, yeah, I mean, we are having to adjust. People don't come home from work and say, honey, did you turn on the 6 o'clock news? I don't want to miss it. I mean, that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
We're reaching our audience in a very different way. A lot of it is digital, which is why I love that we're making adjustments to meet people where they are, which is what news has always done. We've always met people where they are. When people would, walk downstairs, buy their coffee, grab a newspaper on their way to work, that was a simpler time. And yes, it happened. News also came to your front doorstep. News met people where they were always. Um, we were on at 5, 6, 9, and 10 every night. Everyone wanted to see it. You could turn on your TV after dinner and watch the news. We've met people where they are always. Radio, same thing. So we have to do that now. We're adjusting to that. We're probably not doing that as quickly as we should, which is on us. But I just really implore people before they subscribe to the funny guy who says horrendous things about politics, about women, about your neighbor, about whatever. before you subscribe to that podcast and get your news there, also get it from traditional media, because we are bound by ethics that some of these new guys are not. And that's fine. Infotainment is a thing. And I'm glad that at least somehow you're getting informed. The problem is that the truth is not as important to some of those people. And so it scares me. But because of the wider, vast, huge ocean of options now, yeah, we are changing, and I think we are shrinking. I'm probably doing the job of 3 to 4 people 30 years ago right now.
Wow.
I'm a morning anchor. um, I also produce that show. I have a producer with me, but I'm the ranking producer there. And then I go home, I come back, I produce and anchor the midday show. I produce, anchor, book, and host the local politics show as well. I challenge myself to do a story at least once a week. Sometimes that doesn't happen, sometimes it does. But when I'm doing that, I'm taking a camera out, and I'm shooting the story and I'm editing the story and I'm doing, all of that. Um, I'm what I'm doing right now as my one job would have been several people's jobs 30 years ago. That's not the way the industry is. We've adjusted, right? We can do it again. Um, it's scary as I'm watching some colleagues either get laid off or maybe just their position is eliminated altogether. Or, I'm watching, like, WFAA in Dallas is a mammoth legend. And that's, the
Absolutely.
dream for me is to work in Dallas, at any station, because that's where I'm from. But, I grew up watching these iconic journalists, and they have even made cuts, eliminated shows. They're shrinking their product. Now, a lot is going online. So they recently had an EP announce that she was stepping down from the news EP role and going to EP of digital content. There's a lot of that happening. And I appreciate the shift. Don't get rid of the genius, just use it in a different way. And
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that these giant media conglomerates that, own several hundred stations are walking into that mindset of, these really good people, we have to find a place for them, not these really good people, oh, we'll miss them. Because that's when our industry fails, I think.
Yeah.
We have beautiful, beautiful, passionate, talented, intelligent, important people in these roles. So find a way to make it work. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm watching this going, oh man, this is kind of scary. I'd love to retire as a journalist. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's not going to be because I quit. I promise you that.
I told one journalist before he moved to Austin to work for the Austin American Statesman that he couldn't leave Lubbock because he worked for the AJ. And then he
Yeah.
and then he did. I'm like, in case you don't know, that was Alex Driggers. He was a
Yeah,
great local journalist
Alex.
for government. And so it's like, if I tell someone that, it won't be too much longer than when they leave. So I'm not going
Yep.
to tell you that. No, I don't want to be the kiss of death about any of that. But but you're very valuable, and so
Thank you.
and the type of journalism you do is very much necessary, and I appreciate it very, very much. I also want to ask you one. This is another question here that there's a local thing, and it's making national news, and it's local to us because it's happening in our part of the state. It's
Yeah.
it's the measles outbreak, and this is a bit of a
Hmm.
timestamp, a very current issue at the time that we are recording this. So when we
Yeah.
look back, we'll understand what the magnitude of this was. Is um, as a mother, as a reporter,
Hmm.
how do you compartmentalize? Because that affects your family, that affects millions of people, well,
Yeah.
hundreds
Well,
of
it
people
could.
in our
Yeah.
area, you know. So how do you not, like, bring your emotions into something like that can affect you personally?
Yeah, well, I think I will tell you this. When I became a mother, I definitely became a better journalist,
Mm,
because immediately there was a new set of emotions there, and empathy that, of course, I never wanted, a child to get hurt before or ill or, and I would say that before I ever became a mother, I strongly advocated for children anyway. That's just something that's near and dear to my heart. Actually, fun fact, was pretty sure I wasn't ever going to have kids.
mm,
Love does some crazy things to you, but I,
mhm,
when I became a mom, suddenly definitely understood the level of emotion that people get to when it comes to their children. Um, I've never felt real fear until I had a kid, and I'm not gonna lie, I have been shot at before. So it's not the same. Shoot me, don't hurt my kid, right? So it's just really different. So I walk into measles having that, and I also have experience with a pandemic that I remember vividly sitting in a chair talking to my lash technician, right as things were getting a little hairy, across the sea with this COVID stuff, and saying, it looks bad, but I don't really think it's gonna be a problem. That's funny,
yeah.
but and I think that speaks to just how safe and in my little bubble I felt at that time, and a great lesson learned. Uh, you're not. uh, we do have to be vigilant about that stuff. The pandemic was something that none of us saw coming, though, so I don't feel quite so bad. But as a mom, I do look at a family who lost a child and just have incredible sympathy for them. I also, as a journalist, am a very, very big proponent in the First Amendment. That's freedom of speech, but it's also freedom of religion. And that's something that I'm seeing a lot on social media of a certain group that doesn't believe in vaccinations because of their religious beliefs is getting a lot of hate right now. And I have made an honest attempt at making sure that the coverage that I am responsible for does not single them out. Um, because that is something that I've seen that really upsets me, and I think can incite hate crimes, honestly, if we don't do that properly. So that is something that I've paid a lot of attention to in our coverage. Um, and there's just a lot of, I mean, like, hurt people, right? And
Sure.
so there's a lot of hateful things being said on both sides of this issue, because now we have this anti-vax versus vax versus distrust of medicine versus, well, you saw what happened with the COVID vaccine versus what about vitamin A versus, I mean, just all of this. There's
Yeah.
so much information coming in right now. Um, and I will tell you that when I started seeing, I mean, when the cases were in the teens,
Hmm.
when Lubbock didn't have a case yet, I called my pediatrician and asked her questions
Yep.
about my kid. So I do feel blessed that I am a journalist and get some information and know where to find some information, um, because I feel like being informed is how I process, compartmentalize, and also make sure that I'm not acting in an emotional way. But what I learned during the pandemic is that numbers tell a story, but they can also be manipulated. So I try really hard to not make up my mind about the numbers that I'm telling someone, to give them all of the information without telling them how to feel. And that's hard in a case like this. But I think the pandemic kind of trained me. And so I'm hoping that my coverage there hasn't been one sided, or, you better do this, or you guys are dumb if you don't do this, or,
Uh-huh.
because that is not my job. It's hard in a case
Yeah.
like this. And I've made decisions to take my child out of some public things right now,
Hmm.
because she's not 2 years old yet,
Yep.
and germs are really scary.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to live in fear, because I also have a really strong faith, and I know that what's going to happen is already written. So for me, I take that and then I kind of have to discard my fear and then run headfirst into a job that requires me to tell facts, all of the facts, nothing but facts, and hope that people can make decisions that I've helped them stay informed with and not just one sided or half the information.
I think that's fantastic, and that speaks to your professionalism, which is beyond reproach, and I think
Thank
that's
you.
wonderful. I mean, that having a local journalist who demands professionalism and expects that out of herself and others, I think that sets a high standard, and that's something what everybody should meet, and I applaud you for it. So that's wonderful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So, where can people find you if you want them to find you on
Ooh,
social media?
please find me. Yeah, I love new friends. Friends is the key word there.
Uh-huh.
If you're gonna be nice, if just be nice. If you're gonna be mean, maybe don't find me. But yeah, every social media is Jen Phillips News, Jen with one N. And yeah, I sing a little bit, so if you find that, that's Jen Phillips music, but that's not my news page, so I'm not gonna. I've written one song ever about news, and it was when uh, the ERCOT Winter Storm Uri thing happened, and I hadn't showered in 5 days and was still on TV, and I was a little mad. That's on the Jen Phillips music, but the rest of the news is on Jen Phillips News.
I, you know, I even forgot to ask you about things like that. Like, do you do karaoke?
Occasionally I don't do it often, mostly just because I have a 1.5-year-old. So
That's a really good reason.
yeah, yeah. And I, have insane vampire person hours. So
Ah,
that makes it a little more challenging. But one day I'll karaoke again. I will
there
do
we go.
it.
So, um, for those who are listening, this will probably already happen. But by the time that you had this, that you're listening to this, you had a pretty good interview, a pretty big interview in the Lubbock
Yeah.
area with a local lawmaker
Yes.
who I'll help you keep your professionalism and I'll be a little unprofessional. Is that there was this rumor and it turned out to be not a rumor, turned out to be true that local state representative Carl Tepper, who I know and is nice to me and we are friendly and that needs to be out there. But I don't know if he wants to admit that, but it's the truth. Is that he was asked about doing a town hall. He was going to do a town hall, and then he admitted on another radio program that he found out that these were activists and then didn't want to do it anymore and didn't think that they were well enough to actually handle doing it. And it was his staff doing it. So he told them, don't do it anymore. We're not going to do it. And then he said that there were going to be select areas, and your program appeared to be one of those select areas where he would answer questions. Is that how you understand how that happened?
Yes. Yeah. I was actually pretty honored to get a call to be a part of this. And I will be forthcoming and say that this was Representative Tepper's idea to come on our show. And I think he is trying to cover all bases in terms of there's some radio that he's doing, some television that he's doing. He specifically told me the reason he reached out to me is because my show is long form local politics. And there isn't something like that on TV here. So I was excited to have that opportunity, um, just because I felt like, again, having relationships with my local lawmakers, I like it when they call me and they need something. And so I was pretty honored to get that call. What it looks like right now, I've gathered some questions. Again, I've done a lot of research for this because I want to. There's a lot of opinions, misinformation. I've asked people where they've gotten their facts and their figures, just outright, like when they're emailing me questions, because we've had such a huge response, which I am so excited about. Um, Now, some of them are, First of all, where do you get off? Now that kind of question I'm not asking. And I've gotten a few of those, and I'm like, okay, come on, like I'm not going to ask that. Or I got one that was like, well, okay, number one, why do you hate women? I was like, okay, again, relevance. We're talking about school choice. We're not here to attack this man. And I won't, because I'm a journalist and that's not my job. But I am hoping for a really constructive and productive conversation.
Mhm.
What I don't want it to be is, because I know how Mr. Tepper feels about this. And so I want him to be able to explain why he feels the way he feels. I don't personally, I won't be advocating for it because ethically I can't do that.
Yeah.
I do have space for him to advocate for the thing that he believes in, because he's our local lawmaker, and that's what that should be. My job at the during the conversation is to make sure it's balanced with questions that come from both sides. School choice is something that I have covered since I was in college. Both of my parents are educators. I know a lot about it already. I'm trying to make sure that my knowledge is as up to date as humanly possible, minute by minute. When I tell you that the Texas Tribune is my number one read news page on the internet right now, that is fully accurate. I'm trying to soak in every piece of information I can about this, so that when people tune in, they have a confidence that what they're going to hear come out of my mouth is based in fact and based on what is happening right now, and not 5 years ago. School choice has been around forever,
Right.
so this is a constantly evolving issue. I'm trying to make sure that I'm as educated as I possibly can be, and I'm glad that we get to have this conversation, because I am so interested in it personally. But as a journalist, I don't know that there is something more consequential this session than that. That and all the water stuff that's happening is a really big deal. That's a little less sexy, but
Yeah.
that's still huge. So, following this closely was something I was already doing. I'm really honored Mr. Tupper called me and trusted me with a productive conversation. That's, I felt really good about that. I don't necessarily want to be a safe space for politicians. I want politicians to feel like they're going to be treated fairly when they're with me, and that's the difference. So I'm hoping that that is something that kind of shows in this conversation.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to it. For those who may be getting this after the weekend, I can already say it's a good interview because I know Jen and I know she's a good journalist, and I know it's going to be handled well.
Thank you.
I would just want to say, why don't you just ask him why? Well, just ask him. Okay, first of all, this person wants to know why you hate women. Mr. Representative,
Yeah.
why?
That's, and I just feel like some people think I'm going to tape this man to a wall and throw water balloons at him. And I
Uh,
just, I can't do it. And unless, he really just, had an inkling to do that. But again, that is something that you see on cable news. And I'm a local journalist, so maybe one day, but not this time around.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for being on the Outsider podcast. It's been a blast talking with you, and thanks for your time. And we'll catch up again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Drew.
All right. And that is my interview with KMAC local star journalist Jen Phillips. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Be sure that you share this far and wide with as many people as you would like. And as always, I'll see you again very soon.